Welcome to the Good News Mama podcast, a place to get in touch with other mamas, share the load, and know the Lord. Here we aim to lift each other up in the good news of Jesus and the laughter that comes with motherhood. We are a community of mamas just trying to keep the main thing the main thing. I'm your host, Lynn Carter, and each time you tune in, I pray you are encouraged and that you leave challenged and breathe a sigh of relief that you are understood. We were not meant to do life alone, Mama. Thanks for joining in. Let's do this and let's share the good news. So let me fill you in. Thank you, first off. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to a podcast that could potentially change the way that you treat other people, the way that your children will treat other people, the legacy that you will leave long after you're gone, in pointing others to Jesus. I really don't know how to convey the feelings that I was having earlier this week. By now we know about recent events with the murder of George Floyd, and it's taken me a while to process it. I'm not going to lie. I was shook by this, and it's not a new problem by any means. There have been multiple instances before this of injustice, but this one particularly, and the manner at which this person struggled and died, it just shook me. And wanting to intervene but not being able to, and wanting to say with confidence that if I had been there, I would have intervened, but truly not knowing what I would have done. And I think that scares me the most. Would I be willing to risk my life to save someone else that was being unjustly treated? So on Friday last week, I really had time to sit down and think and process what I was feeling, and all the things I felt made me think about George Floyd's mother. It made me think about my children and what would I be like if that was my son being treated that way and his life being taken from him. And I lost it. I've struggled with it. I've prayed through it. I've had a really hard time just with the empathy part. I feel like I have empathized to a degree that I normally don't feel, and I don't know what to say about that. But on Sunday, I happened to run across the sermon with Stephen Furtick and John Gray, and it was at Elevation Church that Stephen Furtick pastors. And they were having a conversation, and they're friends. And in that conversation, I felt God tugging at my heart and confirming things in the way that I felt, as far as not knowing what to say or how to say it, but knowing I needed to say something. And so I struggled with this. And on Monday, I reached out to Ashleigh Hargrave. She's actually a high school friend that we haven't talked with each other in almost 20 years, but she is so full of light and joy, and she's just so fun to be around that I knew that she would be a voice that could give me insight and answer some questions, even though I'm not entitled to her help at all. But I knew she would want to, and she did. She took me up on that offer, and she's on the podcast today, and her insight is astounding. She actually has a career in diversity and inclusion. And Ashleigh just has a way of saying it's okay to not know, but don't stop there either. Don't let that be enough. Do the research and educate yourself. And I echo that completely. Ashleigh lives in Winston-Salem, and she has a podcast of her own called My Big Sister Said, so you're going to want to check that out. We actually take turns interviewing one another around this topic and speaking to each other's audiences. You can also find Ashleigh on Instagram at MBSSA Podcast, My Big Sister Said, a podcast, or her personal account at Ashleigh_speaks, and that's Ashleigh spelled ASHLEIGH_speaks. Just thankful that she was willing to put herself out there. So thank you, Ashleigh. Thank you, Mama, for being here. I appreciate you taking the time, and let me know what you think. Join me on the podcast today with Ashleigh Hargrave. Well, hey, Ashleigh, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here and to have a mini high school reunion, Lynn.
I know, girl. Can I say, sadly, that it's been over 20 years, or it feels like it's been that long?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. 2002. Yeah.
That's
Gosh. It's almost there. Yeah.
Doesn't feel like it. It is crazy. So I'm so happy that you're here today, that we reconnected. I was excited to hear about your podcast and all the great things that you're doing through that. That has been a blessing to me to listen to. I keep getting that intro in my head. My big sister said, and I love it. Your friend needs to whip one up for me. It was great. She's good.
Thank you.
So, we connected just a few weeks ago, really, and said, hey, we should get together, and then really didn't hit up on it and think of anything at that time. But then the recent events going on in our country and in our communities really, it just led me back to, I'm not okay with this. I've got to do something about this. I have no idea what to do about this. There's a problem. And so it made perfect sense that we could talk together, because I know you, I love you, I trust you, I respect you, I feel safe with you. And I feel like that is a big part of it, to be able to have these conversations with people we trust. And so I just wanted to get you on here and hear your take on things. And I'll just let you start off by introducing yourself, and then we can just roll into some of the things that we're feeling and that we want other people to know right now.
Yeah, so my name is Ashleigh Hargrave, Ashleigh Taylor Hargrave. So Lynn and I probably could be cousins down the line if somebody was sneaking out the house. But I work in diversity and inclusion by day. I like to say that I'm a creator by night. I'm a daughter, I'm a big sister, I'm a lover of Christ, I'm the fun auntie, and I'm a friend. And more importantly, I love connecting. And as Lynn said, just connecting with women and being able to share, because I do feel like we have a lot going on as women, but also it's a privilege to be a woman as well, and just being able to encourage each other in our journey.
Yes, absolutely. And, talking with you and hearing your heart about what's going on and some things that you're going through at your work, can you kind of give a little backstory about with your job, what you do, and how these recent events have definitely led into poignant conversations and how you felt about that? We just briefly discussed that. We could have had the podcast when we talked on Tuesday, because we were letting it all out then too. So there's just so much in it. What can you tell me about that and how you're feeling in that regard?
Yeah, so from the daytime, what pays my bills, I do work in diversity and inclusion for a large health care organization here in North Carolina. And our job really is to look at equity in healthcare. So a lot of times people will say to me, well, shouldn't we treat everybody equal? Well, that would be good if everyone had and started from the same place. So that's like saying, I'm going to give you a ladder and I'm going to give another person a ladder. But if the tree that you're reaching into is 20 feet high and the other person's tree is only 5 feet high, even though we're doing things that are equal, it's not equitable. And so my role as one of our directors of health equity is really to look within our service lines and our offerings to really understand what opportunities do we have to really make sure all of our patients and our community is getting the care they need. So I'll say that for the work side. From a personal side, the murder of George Floyd has really put into perspective, and I think brought to a head a lot of issues that we've had in our country for over 400 years, starting in slavery. And really, I think for a lot of people, just because we now have the time with COVID-19, with everything, people were already just at a very critical place, I think, for a lot of people. And then when this happened, it just blew the boiler off of it. And so it's been, I think, for a lot of people, surprising. For some people, day to day. For me personally, when I first heard it, let me back up, because that same week, we heard about Amy Cooper calling the police on somebody. And then 2 weeks before that, we heard about Ahmaud Arbery, but it had happened in February. And if we really hadn't brought it to the news, we wouldn't have known about it. And Lynn was an avid runner in high school. I ran because I had to, because of volleyball, and I run now sometimes. But just even thinking about that of a basic, I would say the basic right to exercise. Let's just talk about that. Just the culmination of all of these things was just a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. And I personally feel that we were just we as a country are at a place where no longer can any of us be silent. And so for me, I've had a myriad of reactions. I told Lynn, I was grieving. I've been angry. I've been upset. I've been silent. I've been introspective. And all of that because as a Black woman coming from a Black family, racism isn't something that was new to me. I think for a lot of people, they were just surprised when this happened. But there have been countless names that we could say that have experienced unjustness. So I think that's where I am right now.
And I think that burdens me the most is just the unjustness of it. I've always considered myself like an includer and wanting everybody to feel seen and valued and heard. And it was funny because before Ben and I got married, we took a strengths finder test. I don't know if you've heard of those.
Yeah,
Girl, that is like pulling the wool off your eyes about how you operate and how your mate operates. And it told me so much about myself that I didn't even realize. But as you're reading it, kind of like the Enneagram, we were talking about that the other night, it's like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense now. So when I figured that out about myself, it made more sense because I did not like seeing people left out. I wanted everybody to be a part of the picture. And so when I see what's going on in this case, and I don't know if I've just had a deaf ear to it, if I've just not been, well, you know what happened before this podcast, I don't even have Wi-Fi in my house. So I'm not even like in tune with all the news going on like I should be. But that is not a good thing at all. And I realize that, and I realize I need to make an effort. And I did want to say, it's not your job to teach me, right? It's not your job to teach us, me, a white community. It's our job to educate ourselves on how to act and how to analyze things and have a perspective. And I feel blessed to be able to have this conversation with you because you're taking the time to show me a perspective that I don't normally have, right? And that I should have just based on how this world is working, how society is working, looking at how our country operates as a whole. Like it's a systemic issue, racial injustice. And so for you to take this time, it blesses my heart. And I know it's going to bless the listeners as well, because sometimes we just don't have the same perspective in any area of life. And to have somebody else open your eyes, it's like for me sitting in church on Sunday morning, like what I told you about the sermon with John Gray and Stephen Furtick that I listened to on Sunday, and just bawling my eyes out for people to articulate things that I've been feeling that I didn't know how to articulate. Right. And hearing perspective from John Gray about how his Blackness weaponizes him before they even know who he is, and just the pain that I felt for that and what he must feel when I don't even come from that background, right? So I say all that to say, I want to know your thoughts and I appreciate them, but I'm not entitled to them. And so it just, I just wanted to put that out there and just say thank you for doing that, for sure.
Yeah, and I think, Lynn, that part is what makes the difference. So just to be transparent and honest, like you said, I do appreciate the fact of being able to have like a real conversation. And it was such a moment for me, even when you texted me on Monday, because I had been in the office, had come back off of a weekend where here in the Triad, we had seen a lot of peaceful protests, but we also had seen things going on across the country with buildings burning and things happening. And so when I got into work, there were all kinds of just words being said and accusations being thrown. And no one took the time to just stop and say, how are you? Like, what are you thinking about all of this? And when you texted me, I was just like, wow, God, like someone that looks different from me, honestly, like can see the pain, because this is not a Black problem. And that's what I've been trying to explain to people. This is an American problem. As a Black woman, I love being Black. I love my Black daddy and my Black brother. I love my Black husband. And in that, yes, there are things that have happened to Black people as a whole, but that is not a curse to be Black. And in the same way of what you said, Lynn, just being open to hear other people's perspectives and just to see that this is not an isolated event. Like you said, the heartbreak that I feel that a lot of people are seeing, like this could be your son, this could be your daughter, that could have been your husband, your brother, to really understand the grief that is there.
Right. And I don't know, I was trying to figure out a way to put this, but I don't know what finally like was the tipping point, because there have been so many things back to back that by the time George Floyd's murder happened, like you said, it had just been building and building. But I think seeing the video and realizing, and I shared this with you the other night, realizing that by the end of what he was saying, he was no longer crying out to his oppressors. He was crying out to the people there. He said, they're going to kill me. He was asking somebody else to intervene on his behalf. And there were people standing there saying, hey, he can't breathe, get off his neck, stuff like that. But it was more of a, would I be willing to sacrifice my life by physically intervening on someone's behalf for their injustice? And I told my mom this past week, I said, I have not felt this way since the Columbine shooting when I was in high school. And Cassie Bernal said, I believe in Jesus, and she was killed. And I identified then as a Christian as well and questioned my own faith. Would I have said yes with a gun to my head? And it was the same, in and of the same example to me, like standing up for something that is right, that you need to do, and would I do it in that instance? And the Bible talks about that in James, that for he who knows the good he ought to do and does not do it, to him that is sin. And that is what really convicted me in that. And it just threw my head and my heart into this turmoil that I didn't even feel like I had a right to feel in some regard, because I felt like it was not my place. I didn't feel, I don't know, justified in that. Like, I don't know really how to explain that thought process, but I then found out what it was, because when I'm looking at social media and news feeds and things that are being said and things that are not being said, I learned that a lot of people were interpreting silence as agreeing with the situation or overlooking it. And I didn't want to become that person, but I didn't know how to say what I needed to say, right? And I felt that I was tagging on to a few things other people were saying or liking a few things that they had posted. But really, I wanted this conversation to be a way to say exactly how we're feeling and have it from both perspectives and be a dialogue and a conversation. And a lot of times for people that are listening, it can be an uncomfortable conversation. That's okay to have. And it, just like when I texted you on Monday, I had no idea what you were feeling, what you were going through at that point in time, but I knew I had to do something. And I felt God prompting me in that way. And just like in his timing, as in everything is perfect, and it was right then when you need it, I was just like, thank you, Jesus, for that. But I learned what I was trying to get to with the whole social media aspect of things is it became more apparent to me that my silence was being interpreted as agreement, and I didn't want that to happen anymore. And I learned that there's a difference between being non-racist and being anti-racist. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. And why is it important to be anti-racist and not enough to be non-racist?
I mean, there's so much power in all of what you just said, Lynn, to even just to unpack that. So I'll even go back to what you said. I appreciate you as a white woman even saying it's not my job. It's not a Black person's job to educate you. Like you even taking the initiative to want to learn yourself. I think as Americans, this country was founded on rebellion. Like I tell people that we have these conversations. If you think about how our country was founded, it was founded by rebellious men who wanted something different. And so when we think about people rioting and looting, people have been quoting Martin Luther King, and he said peace for all. But Martin Luther King also said the riot is the cry of people who've been unheard. So people are saying, well, why are people rioting? And I've been saying, okay, so let's back up. When people kneeled and prayed, no one listened. When people marched, no one listened. When people were out doing races in 5Ks, people didn't want to listen. And so now it will come and affect us. And I appreciate what you said about when you don't even know what to say, just saying like, I don't know what to say, but this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel right. And even kids, I think about that, like even babies, they cry. We're like, what's wrong with you? They'll cry until we figure it out. And so I think right now what you're hearing and what we're hearing in the ground is the cry of a nation, a cry of a people who have for so long been in pain. I was talking, like I said, we're both in healthcare, to a friend who's an anesthesiologist. And I said, isn't it funny how some people, it doesn't take a lot of pain meds for them to go under, whereas other people, it takes a lot. And I said, as it even relates to what's going on in our country, some people have a very high pain tolerance. They have been through so much and they're okay. But for other people, they're not taking this anymore. And so I will use that to answer your question about racism and being anti-racist. So I hear people say all the time, well, I'm not a racist. And so let's just go back to the definition of racism. So racism is a belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. So people will say, well, I'm not racist because I don't think that way. But when you think about anti-racist, that is you actually taking the initiative to step in and say, my actions, my attitudes, my words are going to express an anti-racist idea. And so I love this example that someone shared with me. So if you're saying like, I'm not racist, but you refuse to send your child to a local school because the population is predominantly African-American, that choice is racist because you're saying this school is not good enough. Instead, the anti-racist position would be to say, you know what? I'm going to try enrolling my child at the school, and I'm going to learn about what are the disparities and inequities affecting that school that's not on my side of town or wherever to better understand it. So it's not enough. And I love what you said about just being silent because I don't want to say anything, but it really is opening your voice to say, no, something doesn't feel right there.
Yes. And to piggyback up what you said, I found something that was defining as well with non-racism being passive, like passive rejection, passive opposition, disassociation from behaviors and conversations and ideologies that are considered racist. But non-racism accepts colorblindness and racial neutrality. And it centers on intentions and assumes the possibility of the racial innocence of people and policies and ideas. So in my mind, the translation of that definition was the type of person that I am. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubter. Like, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I've always been that way. My husband hates that quality about me because I'm so naive, right? But I'm like, no, maybe he didn't mean it that way. Like, if you're mad at that person, no, I don't think they're that way. Like, I'm going to look at them in a positive light, right? Because we're glass half full kind of people, right? That's how we are. No, that's not what it needs to be in this situation, because it's a very sit back and just let things play out as they are and quietly disagree without rocking the boat. But anti-racism is described as being critical awareness of race and racism that rejects the accepted racial liberal norms and values. So basically, it's an active process. It's not sit back. It's saying, let's do something about this, stand up, whether that's a conversation that you need to have,
Lynn.
Whether it's, like you said, the small actions, because that's what our kids will see. They'll hear our words, but they'll see what we do. And we all know actions speak louder than words. Those things, like having uncomfortable conversations when people say things that are offensive, maybe not to you, even from where you stand, but saying, hey, that's not okay. Please don't reference that in that way. And then educating, using that as an opportunity. How uncomfortable is that? That is uncomfortable. Nobody really wants to do that, but it's necessary to incite change and to help people have a greater understanding. Because the truth is, I don't feel like people are sat down and said, this is what it is to be a racist. I don't feel like people say, and that's the way Satan works too. Satan doesn't come right out and say, I want you to go kill that person. I want you to conceal from that person. He feeds you the lies. He feeds you all the things that deceive you and that make you think and feel in a way that's, oh, that's not so bad. Or, oh, I see that that's accepted in this way. And then you gain these foundational truths that are not truths, but they're what you've seen and what you've been taught unknowingly, right? And to me, that is the crippling point, because it would be easy to say no to the other things, right? We know that murdering somebody is unacceptable. Absolutely. No matter what color they are. But like you mentioned, the small things like the way that a school system is set up and the classroom structure and the ethnicity and the demographics of the families and things like that. And that to me is very telling that that we are so affected by things that would not be on a billboard sign saying, this is definitely racist, this is definitely not. But then it's all those undertones and things that you pick up on. And we had some conversations about some examples.
Yeah, we can talk about those. I mean, I think also racism is a power structure of a power that is already in place. So you think about, there is a structure that has been set up. I even think about here where I live in the Triad, when I was buying my house, there were times the way that the highways were set up that neighborhoods were redlined so that Black people lived on this side and white people lived on this side. And so even now, 60 years later, there are still some historic neighborhoods that you can still see that so ingrained into this is just how it is. And so when you move into another neighborhood, or I had a classmate from a program I was doing, and he said, well, you can come live in my neighborhood. And I said, I'm sure I can. And I said, but if I had children, would they be accepted at your school? Would my husband, if he came outside in the middle of the night, be taken for a looter or putting our trash out? And so just thinking about even things that have been set in place before we got there. And then some things that even us in our 30s now, we're still benefiting from, depending on what side you're on and what skin color you live in. Yeah. You know, I shared with you, Lynn, you know, growing up, we played volleyball in Eastern North Carolina. You know, even I thought about this, my family was military, but in the town that we lived in, it was almost as if there were three sets of people. So there were the military people, half Black people, but then there was also Harlow, Adams Creek. And there was I didn't realize it then, but then I started thinking it was a very small but divisive divide between people as to, well, where are you from? Like, who are you really? And I shared with Lynn that I remember us playing volleyball. I was maybe one of two Black girls on the team, and we went to West Carteret, which was more toward the water in Morehead City. And I remember walking in the gym, and I was probably in 11th grade that time. And I remember one of the players said, oh, are you the manager? Are you here to set up? And I was like, nah, boo, not the manager. And so,
I'll show you who I am on the court.
Right. And wait for this fight come. Right. I remember number 12. But just, it was an ignorance on her part, because she had never seen a Black person at their school, I guess, that played volleyball. Yeah. Or I also shared with Lynn, I was married and my husband passed away a few years ago, but my husband was an engineer and he drove a BMW. And I remember one Thanksgiving coming back from Georgia visiting family, and he was pulled over by the police. And when the police officer came up to our car, he said to him, like, well, whose car is this? And I, with my little smart mouth, was like, what? And I remember my husband being like, just stop, just be quiet. And so I was like, okay, let me just chill. And him being like, well, where are you all going? What do you have in your trunk? Open your trunk. Well, all we have is turkey and like leftover bread and pies from Thanksgiving. And in that moment, I could see my husband having to deal with that, but then also having to deal with that in front of his wife. And thankfully, I mean, I think he did get a ticket, but thankfully it wasn't anything that was exacerbated. But in that moment, I just saw, like, what does that feel like as a man? You've worked so hard to get this car, and we just like the car. But why was it just an assumption that, okay, you're coming from Atlanta back up 85 to Charlotte, you must have drugs. What are you all doing? Mm-hmm. And it's just that overt thing. But then also, Lynn, there's those little microaggressions. So yeah. I was talking to a friend today, and the little things that happen at work, I don't think we think about. Like when you say to a Black person, well, you speak so well. Or I remember I was going to the beach with my parents, and someone in my office said, I didn't know you people. I don't know if she said you people, but I didn't know you went to the beach. And I said, well, who is you? And she said, well, I didn't know Black people went to the beach.
Oh my gosh.
You scream too. And I said, actually, I do. And I even get a little darker when I get in the sun.
Oh my gosh.
It's just this, and that's why we say those are microaggressions, but those are those little things, because in your mind, and people say, well, that's not a big deal, you're being sensitive. But let's say that she takes that into her mind, that Black people don't go to the beach. So if Black people don't go to the beach, then you don't market products to them. So then there's a financial responsibility. If Black people don't go to the beach, when you see them at the beach, then you treat them like, why are they here? This is our beach, which again is privilege. And so it all comes into a full space of
so sad.
Power structure and power gradient looks like.
Yes. I can't even imagine. I mean, I'm just shaking my head. I'm like, really, like, who says that? And I'm sure I've said stupid things too, right? Because that's a quote that I've always thought of, which is another reason why I try to be silent on things that I don't know fully what I'm talking about. Well, I don't be silent all the time anyway. But my point being, the quote about better to be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. Like that's been in my head lately too. Like if I say something, I'm going to say the wrong thing or say it the wrong way. But then I saw you were talking about some quotes from Martin Luther King Jr. earlier. And one of those that I saw in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And that hit home with me, because that's what people are looking for now. They're looking to see who's just continuing on life as usual, or who is validating, acknowledging, empathizing with what our country is going through and our brothers and sisters are going through. Black and white communities trying to figure this out together and not trying to be so divisive, but trying to educate ourselves and just not take things for granted, because I feel like we do. We take our white privilege for granted unknowingly, and that's just as bad as asking a dumb question like that lady asked you, like, or like that volleyball player asked you. But I mean, as far as advice for the white community, you mentioned to me before, just kind of checking in. You said in the conversation, just seeing how you're doing. What were you thinking when you wanted to give the white community some advice? What would you say?
Yeah, and I'll put a disclaimer that I can't speak for all Black people, but I did ask also some of my friends just to try to get some different viewpoints. And so for me, I think for white people, just really now to listen, just to kind of sit in this, like sit in what you're hearing. I had someone at work said, I didn't really think what was going on TV was real until I saw like Black people at work really upset about it. And I was like, you thought it was like a movie? And he was like, I just didn't think this really happened. And so to hear stories, so I would say, first of all, just kind of sit in it and listen. And then also to what you said, Lynn, earlier, like some people are huge social media persons. It's like their diary. They write everything. I had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. If that's you and you want to use your voice, do that. But then you can also do things from behind the scenes, because I know everybody, we talked about the Enneagram and Strength Finders. Everybody is not going to be outward, but you can do something on your own. Talk to your children. I mean, that's huge. We talk about Good Mama podcast. Like, talk to your kids about, hey, tell me about your friends at school, or tell me about so-and-so's parents, or learning. And then also I would say, don't just mindlessly reach out to your Black contacts. I'm not going to say friends, because I do want to be just clear, because I do hear people saying all the time, like, oh, that's my Black friend. And I always say, well, do they know that they're your Black friend? Or do they know that you're their white friend? So if you haven't developed a relationship with that person to where you know how they like to be approached or how they deal with things, I would be cautious in just like running up to them and like, tell me how you feel. Let's talk about this. But really just being very empathetic and asking and saying, you know what, this is hard for me. And you going first and being empathetic into why it's hard for you, and say, hey, if you'd like to talk, I'm here. I want to hear, I want to listen. But also recognizing that that person may not want to talk about it. They may want to just be in their space and be okay. But for some people, and for some of my friends I was talking to, my real friends, they were saying that it was welcoming to have like their friends reach out to them and say like, hey, this is not okay. Or, hey, like, I want to talk to you. Are you there? So I would just start with asking questions. And then the other thing, and Lynn, I know we're going to talk about this, but just also, if you don't have any Black friends, ask yourself why. That's something that you and I talked about too. Like, a lot of times we go to church with people that look like us, our friends, our kids' friends, our teams that we play on, they look like us. And so challenging yourself even in this, not to say I want to go get a Black friend, I'm not saying that, but just exposing yourself to other cultures on purpose. Like, you know what, instead of going to this store, I'm going to go here, or joining a book club that looks different from you, or whatever your thing is, finding people that like that, but may have a different background from you.
Yes. Did you find during conversations with your friends that you guys came across any points that you differed in, or that you wanted them to know from your perspective? Or like you mentioned, some of them gave you some advice of things that they wanted other people to know. Did you come up with any aha moments during those conversations?
Yeah, I think one thing that one of my friends said, she said, it's hard to heal other people when you're grieving. And so she had someone who wasn't as close to her, it might have been a white colleague, who just came up to her and was like crying and was like, I'm just so sorry, I'm white. I'm just so sorry for everything I've done to you. And she was like, but you've never done anything to me. And so she ended up like comforting her.
Oh, wow.
Talking about everything. And she was like, it was just awkward. And she's like, I don't know what that came, where it came from. So I would say it's not that Black people want you to take on all the grief, or I've heard white people say like, I don't want to be guilty. This is not my fault. No one is saying that you're guilty. What I think some people are saying is, though, you have benefited from this system of oppression. And now, because you're not guilty, do something about it. And it's not, I told Lynn and you and I talked about this, this is not a political thing. This is not a liberal and a conservative thing. This is just a human basic right to live and to breathe. I mean, think about it from that perspective. That's what I heard from a lot of people. And then just also recognizing, I had someone this week, they've texted me every day and said, are you okay? And eventually I was like, I don't have a cold. I mean, I'm okay, but I'm just, this is something that's going on in our world.
Right.
So I would just say, just kind of read people, be self-aware, and just read the situation. Ask people just ask people what they want. Even Lynn, to me, I said, Lynn, how are you feeling? And why are you feeling that way? So just ask people.
Yes, definitely. Good advice. Very good advice. And then I would also like you to speak on what are some statements that you've heard that people have meant in a helpful way, but they're really hurtful. They don't understand the weight of what they say, almost like people that are grieving and someone throws in everything happens for a reason type comment.
Lynn.
Does anybody ever appreciate that comment? I mean, is that ever an appropriate comment? I don't know.
Oh my God. Let me take a side journey. So like I said, my husband died 5 years ago from a short battle with cancer. And so he was in his 30s when he died. And I remember after he died, and I know they were well-meaning, someone said to me, well, don't worry, you'll get another one day. And I said, well, he wasn't a puppy. So I'm sure that I will. But at this point, since it's been a week, that's really not what I needed to hear.
No.
And so, like you said, I do think people sometimes they mean it and everything out of them, but it just comes across wrong. I think right now, one of the biggest ones I'm hearing from people is saying, especially because I work in healthcare, that all lives matter. And I really do use it as an example to say, it's like me. I'm a supporter of the American Cancer Society. And I say, we need to stop cancer because it's killing so many people. And someone says, well, heart disease is important and pulmonary embolisms happen. That's not to say that those are not important. But if cancer is the number one killer of women in a particular age group or men in a particular age group, that is where the focus is. And so Black Lives Matter isn't to suggest that other people's lives don't matter, but Black people and Black men in particular are getting killed and murdered at a higher rate by law enforcement than other people. And so that is where the focus is. It's not to say that white lives and blue lives and red lives do not matter. And I think the other one that really bothers me too is when people say, I'm colorblind, I don't see color. And I'll say, well, do you have a diagnosis? Because we need to get that checked out. And it's nothing wrong with seeing color. I like my brown skin, and it's okay if you see my brown skin. It's okay that people have different color skin, and it's not to be colorblind. Is to see you and say, Ashleigh, you're a Black woman. Okay, yes, your race is a part of your identity, but then there's all these other things about you as well. And I don't have to be colorblind to not see your Blackness to see your other characteristics.
Exactly. Basically saying not that you don't see color, but that you do see and you value it equally. Right? Yeah, that I've learned a few things, girl. I've been looking at some stuff because I feel like not that I've said anything or thought specific ways about those statements, but hearing you put it in that light and seeing other people share their experience with it, I've been able to sit with it a little bit and go, yeah, I see what they're saying there. Much like somebody that puts a blanket statement over something. And who is that really helping? That's just making the person that said it feel good. When you mentioned in times of grief that when people say things, but they mean well, sometimes it's just good to sit with somebody. You don't really have to open your mouth. You can just sit with them and just, like you said, inserting yourself in places that you maybe normally would not. School systems we talked about, and church relationships, or places of business that you would support, things like that. And just thinking with a different mindset, that definitely spoke to me. So.
And I think also using our faith, because we talked about that, like Jesus saw, he said we talk about like the Jew and the Gentile, but then also Jesus saw the Samaritan. He talks about that being your neighbor. And it was okay that the Samaritan woman, it was okay that she was a woman and she was a Samaritan. And I would say there's a resource called Be the Bridge. And it was started by Latasha Morrison, and she seeks to bring diverse believers together, not to make one culture different than another, but just to say, like, we all claim the name of Jesus Christ. God is our Father. So we're all his sons and daughters. Let's come together.
Exactly. And what you were saying about the Jew and the Gentile and the Samaritan and everything, there is in Galatians chapter 2, basically where Paul calls out Peter for being in a form racist, where he was okay to eat with the Gentiles, until some of the Jews showed up, and then he parted ways with them and came over and like almost shunned them as if like
Yes.
they weren't good enough in that instance. And Paul was like, no, no, no. And I think that was the point where they split directions and Peter went one way and Paul went one way. And that to me was eye-opening, because Peter was the rock that Christ was going to build his church on. I mean, he told him that before, and he still messed up and he still was short-sighted in a lot of things. And it just goes to show you that we need each other to point those things out in us, and that, it takes a lot of humility to accept something that we normally wouldn't ever have thought of about ourselves, but that, hey, maybe I need to work on that. Maybe that's a good thing, that somebody can feel comfortable enough to come to me and point that out in love and say, it would be more helpful if you said it this way, or, hey, did you know when you said it that way, it insinuates this? Do you really think that way? Or maybe there's a different way that we can have that conversation or say that, so we're not leading other people or our children into a different mindset than we intend. Are there other resources that you'd want to share besides Be the Bridge? Because I did like that one, and that was the website that was referenced during the John Gray and Stephen Furtick sermon that I saw on Facebook.
Yeah, there's the Center for Racial Justice.org. And then there's also this woman, she's actually a white woman. She created this whole Google shared document, which has been shared like over 100,000 times, called Anti-Racism Resources. A book that I'm kind of finishing right now is called White Fragility. And it's been really good, just eye-opening for me to see from another side. Just trying to understand. And then also Black Like Me is a good book about a family who finds out that they've thought that they were white, but then they were really Black, and understanding now what does that mean for a racial identity. And so I would say going to the Center for Racial Justice, that has a ton of information. The National Museum for African American History, the Smithsonian, they now have a huge online portal that's free. So resources from kids all the way to adults.
Oh, good.
And I just appreciate you, Lynn, saying as a white woman, or as just a person that is not Black, just doing your own research and going on YouTube and listening and reading. I mean, you will become, it can become overwhelming, because I've heard my other friends tell me, like, Ashleigh, I just didn't even know. But also it helps you to learn also in doses that you can take it in.
Exactly. Well, even some of the things that you brought up in the conversation today, redlining and just the school systems and things like that, never crossed my mind. Never had any experience with that. Wouldn't have known any different otherwise. So that was eye-opening to me in that regard. I would say a couple more books that have been recommended to me, White Fragility was one of them. And I've seen some of my friends post some quotes and excerpts from that book that seemed really eye-opening. Latasha Morrison's book, Be the Bridge, it's not just a website, but I'm Still Here by Austin Channing Brown, and The Color of Law were a couple more that have been mentioned to me. And I definitely appreciate people reaching out to me just to educate me a little bit and answer my questions and take the time. And definitely for you, Ashleigh, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate you so much.
Yes, and I just appreciate you, Lynn, because I think it does take courage to say, I don't understand, but I want to understand. And then you just have such a sweet way of I think even back to high school, like, you were a connector. I think that is just who you were in your friend group, being able to kind of move in and out of different groups, being able to just talk to different people and have a conversation. And I think the other thing is people need to realize, like, you're not going to get it right all the time.
Yeah.
And it's okay to have conflict. Like, I know people don't like conflict, and I don't want to do that. But sometimes conflict produces the most beautiful things that you've ever had.
Exactly. Thank you so much. And thank you for saying that. I do appreciate that. How can I pray for you, girl? Because I do want to pray for you as we close out today.
Yeah, Lynn, I'm just really in a space right now where I just want, I don't know if it's understanding for people, or if it's just a place of change. That's what I really want. I want this all to, at the end of the day, 2020 is going to be a year for the books. For our kids are going to be like, what happened in 2020? Right. To know that a change happened. So for me, just to see change, even if it's in small ways.
I'm believing that it will be, for sure. I believe that it has in a lot of ways, and it's been humanness and brokenness in our sin world, that realization as well. But last December, God gave me the word favor for this year, ironically enough, and it's been coronavirus, and it's been all these upheavals of, our society right now. And it is just like God to do something like that but yeah, it's
Yep.
been confirmed over and over in what I've seen. And I think that he is challenging me to look at the spiritual realm and not just the physical realm of favor, to have challenging me to favor him in my likeness and appearance, and just what I'm putting out into the world. And I just speak that truth over you, because you have that
Amen.
desire and you have that passion to connect people, just like you shared. And your heart is for God and it's for his people, and it's to bring us together and not divide us. It's to be heard and not silenced. And I just thank you for that, because it's not easy just to share all your guts on, on a podcast like this. It really isn't. It makes it easier when you have a friend looking at you across the screen that is also sharing their guts. And I knew that's how it would be in this conversation. And I didn't give the disclaimer in the beginning, but I hope that people listening know that you don't speak for all Black people and I don't speak for all white people. We speak for Lynn and Ashleigh, and we are just trying to do the best we can in the name of Jesus. So anyway, girl, I love you so much. And I just want to pray
Love you,
God's blessing
Lynn.
over you right now. Okay. Dear God, I thank you for my sister. I thank you that you brought us a friendship many years ago in high school, and that you reconnected us now for this purpose, for such a time as this, in our world, in our nation, in our hearts, God, where there's turmoil, where there's sadness and there's grief, and there's plenty that's broken. But you're the healer, God. You're the connector. You bestow favor. You reach your hand out and you stretch out your hand and touch us. And that's what you've done in this podcast today, God. That's what you've done in this conversation. I can't thank you enough for that, because you know what I've been sitting with, and you know what my brothers and sisters have been sitting with. And you come and you meet us right there when we ask you to. And I thank you for that, and for showing yourself to us, and for showing up big. Lord, I pray for Ashleigh's testimony. I pray for her influence. I pray for the listeners that she would reach with her podcast and with this podcast, that it would not fall on deaf ears, but that it would incite change in hearts, God. People that will never be the same, because they have heard the truth and now they know the good that they should do, and that they don't want to be caught in sin because of something that they left undone, a good deed left undone. So, God, I just pray that you'd make her influence big. I pray that you would just renew her spirit, lift her up, give her a rest and a refreshing that she needs, because her spirit has been weary going through all this change, and with her job having to take on so much. But God, you are faithful. You tell us in your word you are faithful, and again you prove that you are. And so I thank you for showing us that, and I thank you for all the ways that you have in store to bless Ashleigh and her family and her influence the rest of this year. And I just lift that up to you in the name of Jesus, and pray you keep her safe until we meet again. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Good News Mama. If you did, please leave me a review on iTunes. A 5-star review is best, and hit subscribe. Share with your friends on Instagram and Facebook. Please email me at lynn@goodnewsmama.com. You know I love questions. I love feedback. I want to know what you want to know. We're going to talk about what means something to you. So let's hear it. Follow me on Instagram at Good News Mamas. That's mamas with an S. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Keep your head up, keep your heart humble, and share that good news.